Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Humblefish and Friends. And I am here with DexterB. And Dexter, I want to thank you for joining us today.
I'm glad to be here. This will be fun tonight.
So, everyone, I want to preface by saying we are having some video issues. I did a test run, and it looks like there's some glitchy video, but the audio seems to be solid. So we're gonna go with this. So if the video is a little glitchy, we're sorry about that, but you should be able to hear us just fine. So let's go and start, Dexter, by you can introduce yourself to us and just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got in the hobby and whatever else you'd like to share.
So I'm on the forum. I'm known as DexterB. I'm a moderator on the forum, and I started in the hobby 10 years ago. My real name is Linda, by the way. I started 10 years ago, and about a little over 4 years ago, I started the tank behind me, and I wanted to stock it with all quarantine fish, and that's how I met Bobby. I was on his waiting list when he started Humblefish Aquatics. I told him I definitely want to be on that list. I want to get all my fish from you. So I got on his list,
Those
and
fish
I'm kind of
um,
kind of very slow in my what I do. So I also am still stocking just a little bit.
So tell us a little bit more about your aquarium. Tell us about what kind of tank you have set up. What kind of fish you're keeping. Tell us a little bit more about your setup.
Well, when I started in the hobby, I had a much more traditional tank. It was enclosed in a white cabinet, had mostly LPS coral, more traditional livestock too, like tangs and anthias. And I got to realize that my favorite species were angelfish. So when I planned this tank, I wanted to center it around my dream fish, which was a regal angel. And so I have a lot of angels. When I started working with Bobby to stock my tank, he mentioned I have a 300-gallon. He said you could do like a dwarf angel group. So I have a dwarf angel group. I have gobies, blennies, have some dartfish. But my tank is unusual in that it's a fowler, but it has artificial corals. And there's a backstory we can get to later behind that. I didn't start off with that artificial corals. Originally, my plan was to do like softies and some of the corals that my angels would not bother, like flower pot corals. But long story short, I had to pivot in the hobby. So I now have artificial corals, which work well for me.
Okay. All right. Well, that's an awesome setup, and that's a different setup than a lot of people have. So we can talk about that. Well, actually, let's just get right into it. Our first topic is merging design and habitat. So let's just start right, discussing that, Linda.
Okay. Well, I work in interior design for a home builder, and I do interior design. And the first thing I do when I meet with a client is I don't want to just discuss like aesthetics in their home. I want a home that meets their function. For instance, I want to know who's going to be in the home, do they have any hobbies, and all the information helps me guide them to materials that meet the needs of the inhabitants. And I take that same mindset and apply it to my tank. So when I talk about merging habitat and design, when I do my aquascape, my starting point is always my stocking plan. I want to meet the needs for shelter, a sleeping spot, and natural behaviors for any fish I stock in my tank.
Okay. So basically, like, we'll run through this. I know we had talked about so like with your tank, you always have like a lot of hiding spots and places for the fish to sleep and spots and everything like that. In fact, we have some video here that we can run through that which shows this. And I think it's interesting because, especially in today, everyone is all about they want minimalist aquascaping, or not everyone, but it seems to be kind of a trend nowadays with some people, but they're forgetting that they're not really providing their fish with a safe space, with a place to sleep, with a place to hide and retreat when they feel threatened by other fish. So let's go ahead and there we go, and we'll kind of start scrolling through these photos that you've provided us with. This one right here I'm looking at is a starry blenny that you've got. And so, all these, most of your corals, like you said, are box corals. So, but they accomplish it.
Yeah, the starry blenny pictures, right. The starry blenny pictures to me kind of show a fish that's comfortable in exhibiting natural behaviors. So he's perching, he's showing courtship colors. Now, he's a male starry blenny. I don't have any females in the tank, but he shows courtship colors around feeding time because he's excited, and maybe it's his way of trying to get a response from the feeder. And there's also pictures of him in a little glass fish, which is it's reef safe, it's glass blown, it's not painted, and he sleeps in that, and he shelters in it too, but he sleeps in it. And I've got a couple pictures of fish checking him out in that glass fish. And it's interesting to me when you talk about providing retreats for fish, you're absolutely right. Not only do they need a sleeping spot, but they need shelter. So say you have a fish like a filefish, say it sleeps latched to a rock. Well, that's its sleeping spot. But if it's startled, or like you said, if it's uncomfortable around a new addition, it needs a shelter. So if you startle a fish like that, it's not going to latch onto a rock. It's going to want to swim to a little cave or a little overhang or a shelter.
Right, exactly. And I think
the other pictures, yeah, right.
no, go
Go
ahead.
ahead. Yeah.
No, I was just going to say that.
I was about to say the other pictures.
No, you go ahead.
Go ahead. No, seriously.
Later, go ahead.
I was going to say that the other pictures that you may have already shown is like there's a picture of a modest blenny that was from my past tank, and if you look at the rock behind it, there's lots of bolt holes, and that's another example like a modest blenny. It goes for a bolt hole if it's startled, and then it has like a favorite bolt hole that it sleeps in. And so when you have a stocking plan as a starting off point, it can even help you choose what kind of live rock you want. Like I chose the Carib Sea live rock, which there's a picture of me just with a rock on the floor trying to find pieces that interlock together. I picked Carib Sea because I knew I wanted lots of big arches and lots of big arch swim throughs for my angels and my larger fish. So that's such a good starting point. It can help you dictate design. It can help you dictate what kind of rock. And then as far as design concepts, like a really common one you can search for that pops up is the rule of thirds. And the rule of thirds is just basically 3 columns and 3 rows. There's 4 points of intersection with the grid. And you'll see that when you're editing a photo on your phone and you use the crop feature. So if you apply that to your tank, you just look at one side of the tank as a frame. And if you put that grid on it, the point of intersection would be where you want to put your strong elements. They sometimes call those points of intersection power points. So for instance, when I did my tank, those points of intersection, when I face the front, that's where I have like some of my big swim throughs. So if you take a full tank shot from the front or whatever side, it gives you an automatic photo op. It's pleasing to your mind, and it just works.
Right. Yeah, it does. And I mean, so much is said about stress, about fish stress, and whether you quarantine or not, you want to keep stress to a minimal in your aquarium. So providing your fish with a more natural environment, because they don't have minimal aquascaping in the ocean. They have a lot of rock, so in caves and things like that. So providing them with that natural environment, keeping the stress low, helps. And basically, you're just trying to make the fish feel more like at home, and that's kind of what you're doing. From what I saw from the photos. So how important do you think the arches and the swim throughs are, to kind of give them that, because it seemed like it's aesthetically pleasing, but how important do you think that is to actually make them feel more comfortable in the aquarium by having that?
I think it's really important because, for instance, I like to look at videos of, the species I'm going to add to my tank. I like to look at videos, and a lot of people, just realize that if you're aquascaping and you're going to put tangs in your aquascape, you naturally know that you want to have large areas where they can have those zoomies. They can have those straight runs because
Yes.
a lot of tank, that's their swimming behavior. Angels and butterflies love to graze and they like to do loops. So kind of watch videos of how they swim and think of that when you're doing your aquascape, because we really want to recreate their habitat as best we can. It's just like going to a zoo. If you go to a good zoo, whatever species you're viewing, it looks like their natural habitat. If it's too artificial where you're not providing them those spaces, they're going to be stressed. It's going to weaken their immunity. They could go on hunger strike. It's not what we want to do.
Right. And especially when you add a new fish and the new fish needs a place to hide out, you're providing them with lots of places to hide out. And I mean, as far as the aesthetics, I mean, everyone's got their own preference, but there's nothing saying you can't mix the false corals with the live rock, or as long as you're happy with how it looks and your fish seem comfortable with it, that's all that really matters as far as I'm concerned. But and also like the sleeping spots, because I've noticed that whenever
Mm-hmm.
if there's fish, if there's aggression between fish, there's a fish fight, or at night, they all go to their favorite, that's their safe space. That's where they go to sleep. So they kind of need to have that to sleep at night, or they need to have it to retreat. Sometimes there'll be like a big fish fight, and then when it's over, all the fish are kind of in their sleeping spots, just kind of breathing heavy, kind of, trying to get it out of their system, I guess, so to speak, before and everything. So yeah, it's awesome how you have that. That's really great.
Oh, thank you. And I've had both situations. I've had a tank with coral. I had a tank without coral. And when I had coral, how I got into using artificial corals was back in that tank that I had originally. I had a pair of flame hawkfish. One was very comfortable, very outgoing, and the other one was not exactly cryptic, but just not comfortable. And the corals she would land on were kind of wispy, so they would just bow under her weight. So I thought, and I had all LPS. I didn't have any coral that could, sustain her weight. So I thought, I've seen ocean aquaria, these artificial corals. I want this fish to thrive. So I got artificial coral that was branching. And the minute I put it in the tank, she immediately landed on it. I could tell she was comfortable. She was out more, and probably used it a month before she started perching everywhere, like my other flame hawk that I still have.
Mm-hmm.
And it made a big difference. So I used artificial corals for a long time as part of like my bag of tricks. If I introduced a fish and it didn't seem quite comfortable, I would put it, say, near a burrow if it was a bottom dweller, or if it was a perching fish, maybe added a like that branching coral. I just used it as part of my resources, and also kept them in case I ever needed to put a fish in a hospital tank. Like, say, if one, my NASO one time jumped and nicked its side, saw it happen, and he ended up doing great and didn't need a hospital tank. But had I needed to put him in a hospital tank, I would have put artificial corals in there just to make him more comfortable.
Right. So where do you get your artificial corals from?
Ocean Aquaria, and it's a great company. I mean, they're very like they act like a small family business. They've done big installs and big jobs, but they're great. To you can request certain colors. You can request certain color, like two colors, if you wanted. I've got a example. Let's see. Here we go. And here we go. Like this one. You
Okay.
can have like two separate colors.
Nice.
And I'll say this, like being in design, yeah, in my tank I have, if I was going to do like an Instagram tank, which my tank's not an Instagram tank, but if I was going to do that, I would go with the more softer colors, the more natural looking colors. And I have some of those. But they do also make brighter corals for people who that's more their taste. And I have that behind me if I kind of move that red one. That
Okay.
was a red barnacle coral, and I was kind of playing in the tank one day, and I was using that. I'd saved it for like a hospital tank, and I placed it in there just to check a height first, as I was laying out rock and things like that. And my bicolor blenny landed in it, and he was just like, "Oh, this is the best thing ever." And that's his sleeping spot and that's his shelter. So I never have been able to remove it because he latched onto it. So that was something interesting about these two, is they do have some corals that you have to ask them specifically, that are barnacles that are very deep and open. And my Blenny loves it. He absolutely, feels really safe, and he's out all the time as a result.
Yeah, that's great. That's great information. I mean, again, I think a lot of people kind of overlook. I think sometimes people don't fully comprehend that fish are living things, and that they're individuals, and they need some place to feel comfortable. They need some place to feel safe. We all have a bed at night. Well, hopefully, we do that. We sleep in at night, and we have a home that we live in, and that's our comfort zone. And fish are the same way. They need an area of your aquarium that they feel is theirs. They feel is, if they're threatened, they can hide in. If they go to sleep, they want to sleep at night, that's somewhere they can go. So that's great. And I love kind of how you mix, live rock with the artificial corals, and mix and match, and just kind of create an environment that's unique, you know. So I think that's really cool.
Right. And thank you. And a lot of times I notice when people post to Aquascape on the forum, for instance, to get feedback, I think a lot of times we can give them feedback on the aesthetics of it, like it really looks good or it's attractive. But sometimes they need to add more caves, and sometimes there's two things we don't know. We can't see all of it, all the different angles, all the way around it, like 360, unless they post that. And the other thing is, we don't know what they're going to stock. So, for instance, I was in a local fish store, and he was using the flat Marco rock, and it was just he had just sort of stacked it, and that rock's fine. He just sort of stacked it, but he had no, this is the fish store, he had no caves, he had only swim throughs at the base. So that fish store, I would not want to, I would only use a aquascape like that as a coral tank, or maybe put some anemones in there and have some clownfish in there, that kind of situation. But when people post on asking about their aquascape, it might be helpful for them to let us know what kind of fish they're stocking. And then members could join on and say, well, if you're stocking that, I would add this, or I would add a big cave, or I would add, an arch or a swim through, or if it's tangs, make sure you've got a nice run area.
Right. Right. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, it's kind of like you want the your aquascaping to be aesthetically pleasing, but you also have to think of the fish and their needs, and that's the whole point. So okay.
Exactly.
Okay, well, we've talked about that. You want to go ahead and move on to the next topic? How to pivot and stay in the hobby. What do you mean by that?
Right. Okay. Oh, I'll add one more thing. I almost forgot. The other thing I see in aquascapes before we get to pivot, I forgot to mention, vary the heights. Like in that LFS, he had no height variation. When you vary the heights of your live rock, you break up sight lines. And like one of the pictures I had was like, there's two blennies. There's a starry blenny and a tail spot blenny swimming in the background. When you break up sight lines, you reduce aggression, and they're not having to, your perching fish aren't having to stare off, but also your grazing fish are not constantly in the line of sight as they're grazing on the live rock. So that was the other thing. And when you break up sight lines, maximize the depth, like the picture you showed earlier where I had just live rock sitting. Like when I do arches, I'll do arches sort of parallel to the front of the tank, and then I'll have the arch going the other way, like at a right angle. Or a lot of times I'll have one arch and then another arch coming off of it as an angle. When you do that, make sure when you aquascape, you maximize your depth, because like at that LFS, that aquascape I was watching the man create, he wasn't he had everything smack in the middle, and he wasn't using staggering rock and making use of the depth. So if you had another tank side by side where somebody was maximizing the depth, staggering, having different heights and staggering rock at different distances while still maintaining that perimeter where you can clean the tank, it makes your tank look bigger, makes it look deeper.
Okay. Yeah, I'm running the
But yeah,
I'm running the video back through, the pictures back through
right,
about
right.
this.
Mhm. Right. Yeah, I almost forgot to mention that. That makes a big difference. And the another trick I've used when adding fish is I don't complete the aquascape, and I save some of the Carib sea rock. So sometimes if I'm going to add a fish and I'm using an acclimation box and everything looks good and I'm getting ready to release the fish, I'll add like another small little cave or arch in the back. And I did that when I added my flagfin angel. And the fish get so curious and distracted by it. It's like when you do release that fish that they're ignoring an acclimation box, it's another trick
Right.
that helps. That, that's that trick that people say, vary the aquascape. They don't mean remove a cave from a fish that's established. They mean add something. So,
And it's not.
but to get to the next topic, pivoting.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, let me turn. Yeah, I was just going to say, and
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
It's a good strategy because it's not already claimed. So then they're checking it out, and maybe the new fish will claim it since none of the other fish have already claimed that as their territory. But
Exactly.
yeah, okay. Well, let's move on to how to pivot and stay in the hobby. So I guess first, maybe explain what that means exactly.
Yeah, you never know what life's going to bring. You sometimes have to pivot, and when you pivot, you can make a decision. You can say, is there a way I could make things easier on myself and make things more manageable? Or do I need to, which sometimes happens, sometimes you have to take a step and take yourself out of the hobby for a while, take a break from the hobby. But if you don't have to take a break, if you can just think, well, how can I make it more manageable? You can do that. That's what I did. When I met Bobby and I was stocking this tank, we had a friend that was severely ill. We were making all kind of trips to MD Anderson and things like that. And so my plan was to do soft corals and certain corals that, like I said, the angels would not bother possibly. And when I did that, when I pivoted, I know the whole time I was stocking, I was careful. And when I would talk about my stocking plan, I know there was one fish I mentioned to Bobby, and he said, I don't think that fish, I think it might be a little too feisty for your Regal Angel. I would not stock that one. That's another thing. If you have to make a change and make it easier, listen to people if they advise you and take the easier route. Don't try to, well, maybe if I use an acclimation box, maybe if I'll do this. Because when you have to pivot, it's either an unexpected event like a job change, where you have to travel more, an illness in the family, an accident, your job may require more time at work. So look at all the ways you can make it easier on yourself. So when I had to pivot, I thought, you know what? Instead of going the original plan and having some corals in the tank, I'm going to go fowler. And I had just a few tiny artificial corals in the tank. And my fish were happy because I'd aquascaped around, their swimming patterns. But I was in an LFS that sold ocean aquaria corals, and they had that. If you look behind me, that big yellow coral is a fire coral, and they had that tall yellow one, and I also got a tall green one that's identical, just a different color. I thought, those would soften my overflow. So I purchased both, and the minute I put them in the tank, they were so large, my fish just responded so positively. They just were swimming all around them and perching on it, and they got so excited. I thought, you know what? That's what I'll do. I'll just add some more artificial corals, and the fish are responding to it, and that's all that matters. So that's how I ended up with having the corals. I will mention this. I I don't think it's very functional to have the big inserts, or at least it's not for me. If I had a big insert, pulling it out of the water to clean it it'd make a mess, and it's going to be heavy. So I have individual ones that I use, and they can come with a screw. You can have the screw or not have the screw in it, even to put in a hole in the live rock, and it just it's just according to your taste. But that's what I did. I'm not saying that you should get artificial corals or you should do this. You just have to evaluate what makes it easier for you. I also made sure I knew I'd be traveling a lot. I have lots of emergency kits labeled for what they are. Like, here's the spare heater, here's the spare circulation pumps. I labeled the heck out of everything ad nauseum. So anybody that had to address, say, an issue, and I'm talking them through that, everything's labeled so it's easier for them and reduces the stress.
Right.
So those are some of the things I did to make it manageable.
Yeah.
Right. For a tank sitter or a spouse.
Right.
And not everyone may have to go to that extreme, but I live in an area where not many people have tanks. So it's necessary for me.
No, it's good to, like, take every and all precautions, because you may expend a little extra time and energy, but you're kind of covering every possibility. You have a contingency plan in place.
Exactly. And, when you pivot, it doesn't have to be a bad thing. For instance, when I decided to go Fowler, I thought, I would love to add some non-reef safe butterflies, because on the forum, one of my favorite threads is that butterfly group. They're very knowledgeable. They're very interesting. All the members that have the butterfly tanks to read. Plus, the fish are gorgeous, and the guys and women who are on there are very witty. So I thought, I'm going to add some non-reef safe butterflies. So I added from Fish Hotel, I added a spot band butterfly and a pearl scale. And I've had a great time with that, watching those fish and having them in the tank. So you can look for the perks if you have to make a change.
Right. You're able to keep all the not reef safe fish that everyone wishes they could keep, but they can't because they're going to eat their corals. So, and I'll just say this: look, I know I've helped a lot of people get into the hobby, and a lot of people, that they come to me, they always have their ideal tank. And I like to use acros. A lot of people are just fascinated with those colored sticks, and they want an acro dominated reef. For some people, it's almost their very first aquarium. That's what they want. They're mesmerized and fascinated by it, or whatever it is. Can be, there's some people, there's fancy chalices or acans or something that they want, or whatever it is. And sometimes they fail. Sometimes their dream tank doesn't come to what they hoped it would be. For whatever reason, they're unable to grow the acros. They're dying, whatever's going on. And I can't tell you how many times I've watched people just beat themselves silly. Just they make themselves miserable trying to achieve this dream aquarium, and to the point where they just want to leave the hobby. But kind of like what you're saying is, like, you don't have to do that. You can pivot. You can say, well, you know what? I'm going to kind of take a step back, and I'm going to try some easier corals first. Or maybe I'm going to do a fish only system. And look, maybe someday you will get back to the point where you're like, okay, I've learned what I need to know. I've got more knowledge under my belt. So maybe now I will now take, try to get my game up where I can tackle acros or whatever it is you were originally trying to do. But yeah, so many people just seem almost fixated on that. It's almost like they have this mental picture of how their aquarium is going to be. It's almost never that way, because just like with everything else in life, your aquarium throws you curveballs. So like you're saying, you have to pivot, make changes, just enjoy the hobby for what it is. Don't drive yourself crazy trying to achieve something that maybe right now you can't achieve, but maybe you will be able to achieve down the road.
Exactly. When I started, the few people I would run into that did have tanks where I live, they would tell me, you show pictures of your tank and you're sharing that in the fish store. And they would tell me that they said, you need to do this granted, this is just the area I live in. You need to do a real tank with SPS. And I would say, this suits me now. SPS requires more care. And I said, I just started, so this is where I want to stay. And I'm happy with that. And, it's be happy in what you can manage and enjoy it. And it's just like, I know I once, when I was sharing some pictures at a fish store, or no, it may have been Reefapalooza or some reef show I happened to go to, I had the branching coral for my flame hawk that I'd put in, and somebody looked and they said, "Oh, what kind of coral?" And I said, "Well, it's an artificial coral." And they were like, "Oh." Don't ever let anybody dampen your spirits in what works for you and what works for your livestock. Just go with it. Because there's pros and cons to everything. It's like artificial corals, I do have to clean them, but not as often as people would think. It depends on your tank. I'll clean them probably maximum every 4 months, but usually about every 6 months. And they're not really dirty even then. And there's pros and cons to everything, and you have to choose what works for you and be happy with it. And if anybody ever says something negative, don't let it affect you. If you're taking good care of your livestock, that's what's important.
Right. So what I'm doing right now, the pictures are on the screen. So right here, we wait just a moment. So this is what your aquarium, and I'll pause it here. This is what your old aquarium looked like, the picture you sent me. And in this picture, you can see that it's mostly, it's live corals. It looks like mostly live rock, but live corals. So it's more of what most people would consider to be a natural reef setting. And that at the time suited you. Now I'm going to play the rest of the photos. We'll just let them kind of scroll through here. And this is what your aquarium looks like now. This is what you've pivoted to. And I think it looks great. Here's a picture with the flame hawk and the you got the artificial coral there with the natural coral, and there's a goby there. It looks like a dot dash butterfly to me. We're scrolling through the photos. So there's your tank. I'll pause it right
and
there.
one of those, right. One of the photos that shows the flame hawk, the pink spotted goby, and it's a donut rock from Carib Sea.
Yes.
I'll enjoy those. That same donut rock, you have the spot band butterfly swimming towards. Well, like the one with the starry blenny, the flame hawk, and the pink spot, I think it's one of the things I think that's cool about that is if you have a space for every fish plus extra, you'll see fish that you normally wouldn't see kind of hanging out together and not, feeling intimidated. It's just fun. It's like there's that picture at the beginning with the starry blenny. I'd add those were fish from Fish Hotel, the Exquisite, and then the scissor tail gobies. That was their first day in the tank, and they were already checking out the starry because they felt confident.
Right.
So
yeah,
it just makes a difference.
And I'm looking at your this is kind of like a full tank shot of what you have now, and I can see. I mean, you've got this beautiful regal angel, beautiful. Looks like a male blonde naso tang, a bicolor angel, a potter's angel. So you have a lot of fish that a lot of people covet, but you're able to keep at least some, especially the dwarf angels. You're able to keep these because you don't have corals for them to nip on. You don't have to stress about that.
Yeah, that's right. Those happen to be all those fish that I got from you, and I remember it's really exciting. I was in the LFS, I guess, about 4 months ago, and used to be where I live, nobody believed in quarantining, and I was in the LFS, and one of the guys said, "Hey, she's got a regal," and so they said, "Oh, let me see your regal." I was showing them pictures, and they were saying, "Well, what's your key to success with a regal?" And I said, "Well, I provide them with a natural habitat or natural aquascape as I can." But I said, "But he's quarantined. All my fish are quarantined." And before I could mention Humblefish Aquatics, he said, "Well," he goes, "quarantine." He goes, "Hey, I'm learning to quarantine from Humblefish." And he said, "Have you ever heard of him?" And I said, Yes, I said, I work on his forum. And he looked at me like, nah. But anyhow, so we started talking. He was really excited. And I thought, wow, what an accomplishment. Now, people where I live are talking about where before they were just like, oh, that doesn't work. Now they're talking about quarantine. And I said, yeah, that's true. I said, the real secret to having a regal in my tank is I got him from a quarantine fish vendor. I got him from Humblefish himself. So, back when you were not traveling and doing that. So that was really exciting to me. And, you know, a bunch of people started coming up and we all started discussing quarantine. It was just exciting to see that change.
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot more information about quarantine now. I think at one time, quarantine was mysterious, and it's like anything else. And look, it's like anything else. When you first do something, you're not going to be good at it. You're not going to be good at it. It's going to take you a while to learn, and as there's growing pains, and you're going to get better and better, hopefully, as you go along. And I think some people have seen that. Even people who may have struggled with quarantine initially, they get better as time goes on. And now there's a wealth of information out there. I mean, it's all over my forum, other forums, Facebook, and everything that tells you how to quarantine, step by step guides, what medications to use, pictorial guides and everything. So I think that's just helped people feel more comfortable with quarantining, and like, well, I can do this for myself. Or if you don't have the time or patience or whatever for it, you can buy your fish from a quarantine fish vendor.
Right. And that's another way to pivot because there's been several people on the forum that sometimes they would try quarantining themselves and they would just get overwhelmed, and because it's such a time what am I trying to say, it's very labor intensive, but it
Yeah.
requires a lot of time with observation, and that's hard to do. That's hard to do and juggle your work schedule, family. And so a couple people I could see that struggle, and I would send them a PM and say, hey, look, um, that's admirable. You want to do that, and I get it, but maybe this isn't the time for you to do it. There's no shame, use a quarantine fish vendor, off our forum. Look into that. That's certainly what I did, because sometimes your time is so hard to manage that you can look at that as a resource, and it's certainly a lot less stressful.
Right, right. And you can do both, really. I mean, you can buy from a quarantine fish vendor, and you
Mhm.
can, do your own quarantining, or it's like, look, everybody's got their strength in this hobby. I mean, mine happens to be quarantining, but I mean, I don't know anything about plumbing. I'm not I'm not really good at plumbing. I couldn't build a stand to save my life probably. So, we have to realize what our strengths and weaknesses are. And if you think your weakness is quarantining, or you just don't have the time and energy and free time or whatever to quarantine, pay somebody else to do it for you. I mean, a lot of people do that. So yeah, that's really cool.
Right, absolutely.
So that kind of moves us on to our next and final topic, due diligence. So I'll just let you open up with that. What do you mean by due diligence?
So to me, due diligence is two things. It's having a strong foundation of basic concepts, and it's also being prepared for emergency situations. Um, I'll start with like the strong foundation. In education, they talk about prior knowledge. When you start a new subject or a new interest or a new hobby, the how well you will do starts with your prior knowledge, your foundation. The stronger it is, the faster you'll move through the levels. The faster you'll move through the level from beginner to intermediate to advanced. And what I see is, for instance, is interesting in this hobby. It's not necessarily, I'm not referring to say newbies per se. There's people who've been in the hobby years that you can read what they say on a forum or Facebook group or whatever, and you can see they have weak basic concept knowledge. Like they don't really, they'll think, well, ammonia's gone in my tank. So my tank is new, but ammonia's gone, so I can add a big fish first, or
Right.
several big fish first. Or they'll acclimate, and you never know when a shipment could be delayed. They'll be ready to acclimate a fish, and they don't have methylene blue on hand, or an air stone or air bubbler. There's certain things that if you have a good strong foundation of the basic concepts, then when somebody on a forum is advising you, you'll understand. When I started, one of the first things I asked is, give me some good reference books, because I want to learn. Hired somebody to set up my tank when I started, but I thought, I want to understand what you're doing, because I want to be able to take care of the fish, of the living things I put in the tank, the fish and the coral. And they were like, oh, books are kind of obsolete because everything's so automated now. Well, that's not true, because those basic concepts like the nitrogen cycle and all that, those haven't changed. So when you have a good foundation and you understand the chemistry and everything else that's involved, then when you use automation, you understand what it's monitoring. You understand the information it provides you. You really don't grasp that if you don't have a good foundation.
Right. No, you're
So, like,
correct.
I know you were one of the few individuals who recommended books, that I encountered.
Yeah, you have to have that.
It makes a difference.
You have to have that basic solid foundation, to build the house, right? So, and I think, I tell a lot of people nowadays, I know it's so tempting is when you're starting in the hobby to just start out with automation, reactors and controllers and all this other stuff. And there's nothing wrong with those things. But if you will learn how to do
Mm-hmm.
everything manually first, and then once you've got the hang of it, then move on to
Mm-hmm.
automation, you'll, number one, understand why things work the way they do, and if the automation ever fails, if you have a calc reactor and it breaks or whatever, well, you know that you can just go back to manually dosing calc every night. It's good to have that, that
Exactly.
foundation. Yeah. And I think for some
Yeah, and
people.
it's interesting.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I was just going to say it's interesting because sometimes when you're reading a thread, you can see the person from what they're posting or their lack of response. You can see they're getting overwhelmed. So if you don't have that foundation, when people try to help you, you can't grasp what they're trying to say. You really don't understand precisely what how they're trying to guide you. If you're too weak, you get more stressed and overwhelmed. And as much as they try to help you, that's the responsibility of the hobbyist. You've got to know those basic concepts before you start a tank, or you should. Otherwise, when people try to help you, you're like a deer in the headlights.
Right. And I think sometimes it's a lack of patience. I mean, look, everybody wants instant gratification, but an aquarium, I mean, you're starting out with almost nothing and you're trying to recreate an ecosystem, and I mean, it really takes a lot of patience to do that. Like, we were talking, I know you and I were talking earlier about, I actually think would probably be the best thing is when a tank is newly cycled, it's been 4 to 6 weeks and you're getting, like zero ammonia and you're only getting a nitrate reading. It would really be great to start out with small dither fish. As tempting as it is to drop a tang or an angel in that tank, because that's the fish you're really, I mean, it could be the whole reason you set up the tank. Be patient, add some cardinals, add a pair of clownfish, start out with smaller fish, because that's going to do two things. Number one, it's a light bio load. They're not going to poop that much, so they're not going to stress the nitrifying bacteria levels. And secondly, it's a good way to test. It's a good way to see if you're getting an ammonia spike with a couple of clownfish. Well, good thing you caught it then before you added a regal angel or a naso tang or whatever. So it's patience, and it's sometimes a lack of patience. I feel people have.
Right. And something else I learned when I first started, look for the people that tell you no, or the people that give you limits. because like I know when I would travel, I love fish. When I first started, I always wanted to go in every fish store. And I became aware there are people that either through not knowing or just wanting to make that money, they will tell you, oh, this will be okay or this will work. And I would get on my phone. I thought, well, let me look that up. And I would find out they were wrong. So that's actually how Eat Breakfast on our forum, TJ. I was reading posts he would have years ago, and I noticed that he would tell people no or that won't work. And I thought, oh, someone I can trust. So I started following him, and by following him, I started reading your information, and I noticed the same thing. You would say, no, that won't work, or I advise against that. That's something to look for. That's it. Someone who will be straightforward with you on the best course will tell you no or give you limits.
Right. I mean, look, nobody wants to tell someone no. I mean, that doesn't make me or anyone Mr. Popular to say no, you can't do that, especially when you know that the person's wanting to hear yes. But people are telling you no because they're looking out for your best interest, and probably more importantly, they're looking out for what's best for your animals, for your fish or corals and everything. Because the last thing at the end of the day, we don't want to see animals dying, and that kind of goes back to due diligence, is to do
Right.
everything. Obviously this hobby, there's there's risk, but you want to do everything possible to limit losses, with your livestock.
Right. And sometimes it's good news. I know I was looking at the flagfin angel on Fish Hotel, and I thought, man, it's so cute. I would love to add that. And I thought, well, I've got my group of dwarf angels, and I don't think it will work, that I'd had from you forever. And I'm like, that dwarf group's so established. And I thought, well, I'm just going to ask. You were traveling. I thought, I'm just going to ask TJ, who's our stocking expert and fish species expert. So and he said, well, yeah, he goes, I think there's a good chance it would work. Use an acclimation box. And he was giving me, all this advice, and it did. It worked beautifully, and I'm so happy. So a lot of times, sometimes you will think an answer is no, and it's not.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Or sometimes it's not really a yes or a no. It's like a, well, it may work, it may not. This is the chances. Sometimes something is likely to work or not likely to work. So like someone like TJ, who's an expert in fish behavior, can give you an assessment of whether or not it will work. So
Right. And another thing I'll mention on due diligence before I talk about like some emergency kits, I think we need to feel confident enough or kind enough to sometimes, if you see someone and you see they're kind of going from crisis to crisis, to say, hey, I think you may need to reset and go back and learn some basic concepts, because I think you might have some holes in your foundation. And I think you'd feel less stressed. I think you'd feel more confident and have better success. That's not unkind. As a matter of fact, it's the kind thing to do, because I know in the past I've seen members, sometimes tell someone that, or I know I once told this guy on the forum, I said, I think that, and I asked him some questions, and sure enough, he didn't realize some basic things about ammonia. And it can be on a forum or on the internet, it can be misleading, because people can post something knowledgeable that they've read, and you think, oh, they know all this. And then you'll notice something like that, an action they've taken, and you thought, oh, that that sounds like they don't know how that a tank's not stable yet. So
right.
kind of watch those inconsistencies, and it's not unkind to tell them, hey, reset a little bit, and I think you'd have better success.
So let's talk about your emergency, and I'm going to put this up here because you have a kind of an emergency kit here. There we go. So what do you have in your emergency fish meds or kit? That we're looking at here.
Right. So that's just one of my containers with fish meds in it. And so what I do is on the forum, you've got a sticky of medications to have on hand. And I have that in different containers in the room behind my tank. I have that in different containers, and I put like a Humblefish sticker on there. So again, if a tank sitter or my spouse is going back there, I'm like, okay, this, like if one needed a bath, you know, if it got a little nick and I wanted to have a methylene blue bath, I'd say, okay, go to the container, look for the Humblefish sticker, and you'll find methylene blue. Just makes it easier for them to see. So that's one kit. And then I have another kit in a big tote of extra equipment, like a spare heater, spare circulation pumps. Let's see what else. Extra thermometers, air bubblers, all kinds of things for emergencies. And everything's labeled with the contents. And another emergency kit is like on fish arrival day. In case it's ever delayed, I've got the air bubblers, air stone. I've got a colander because you have often talked about, you know, don't catch them in a net, and think of it, file fish. There's so many fish that, you know, their gills can get caught on a net. Have a colander. Have like an extra little heater, prime, all that. So I have different kits for different purposes, and it keeps it organized, but it also alleviates that stress, because when something happens and you live where I do, about the only thing I can get locally is prime and methylene blue, but everything else I have to order. And you've got a, you know, stressed or injured or whatever fish, and you're waiting on Amazon, you know, for 2 days. It's, you know, it's an uncomfortable feeling.
Right. And, you know, methylene blue is such a, I feel it's a great chemical because, I mean, it can do so many things. I mean, it increases oxygen transport to a fish's cells. It can reverse ammonia poisoning. It's kind of a mild anti-parasitic, antibacterial, antifungal medication. So especially if you have fish that are arriving in the mail, and let's say shipping didn't go as planned, and the fish arrive in rough shape, that's the best thing you can do. Put the fish in methylene blue. You can do a 30-minute bath, or there's actually an in-tank dosage if you want to go that route. I've actually saved fish that were delayed for days and days and were like exposed to 90-degree temperatures by using methylene blue. And the best part is it's so mild and gentle, it's not gonna hurt anything. It's not like exposing a fish to copper, which is, you know, a harsh medication. Methylene blue may not help, may not save the fish, but you can be rest assured that methylene blue is not going to kill the fish if it isn't capable of helping.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, and everything you talked about. I mean,
Right.
air pump, air stone. I think it's a good idea for people to have an extra, like, you know, return pump on hand or a skimmer pump on hand, because look,
Mm-hmm.
pumps can break at any time, and you've got at least a spare to use until you can buy, you know, a new one or whatever. So, yeah, definitely be prepared.
Yeah, and if you're thinking about how to do a emergency kit, use our stickies. Like you've written stickies on the medications to have on hand, like the sticky on how to set up a quarantine tank, and like the hang on the back filter, all that. Uh, Quarantine tank or hospital tank, what you would use on a hospital tank is the same as a setup for a quarantine tank, like Dr. Tim's or Fritz Quick Start, you know, something to quick cycle the tank. Look at those stickies, and that can help you build a very good emergency kit
Right.
for your tank. Those stickies are a great resource.
So let me just say right now, if anybody's got any questions,
And if you,
no, go ahead.
I was going to say, and another thing, it like the stickies. Remember, like we also Bobby's done YouTube videos for the different stickies, like the different topics. So Bobby's mentioned this before, like if people are visual learners, that's why Bobby did it. Bobby said, you know, I'm going to do these for people who are visual learners, because sometimes people will get in a situation, they're kind of stressed, but if they see it on video, they can process it more, because they might be more, you know, it might be more visual, and seeing it, you know, actually in a video helps them process and retain the information.
Right. I'm just going to say at this point, we got about 6 minutes. We'll go a little bit over if we need to, but if anyone has any questions, if you're watching the live stream right now and you have any questions, just put it into the chat box, and I'll make sure to whether you have a question for myself or for Linda, I'll ask the question. One other thing I want to talk about before we move on to the questions, and I know you had it in your notes, local clubs. And these are things, it's such a shame because these are dying. You know, I came up in the forum back when, back up in the hobby when there were more local forums. And I understand that nowadays more of the local forums are becoming like local Facebook groups. But the point is, if you can, whether it's a local forum or Facebook group, if you can find a mentor, someone local to you that will kind of take you under their wing and show you the ins and outs of the hobby. I mean, there's even like some forums I've been associated with. People will actually go over to people's houses. They meet in person. They've helped people set up their tank. That is such a blessing to have if you can find someone like that that will actually, you know, will help to mentor you. That helps tremendously, I find.
Right. And, you know, if you feel a little shy about asking somebody to help mentor you, do like a barter system, like whatever your skill or your background is. Like if you are good at, you know, tinkering with cars, tell them, look, I'll take a look at that, your car, you know, or I'll help you, you know, with this, or I'll, you know, bake you something, or what. Look at ways to barter where you don't feel like so inhibited about getting the help. That there's nothing, like you said, like that in-person help. It's like Andrew mentioned on one of your live streams. He said it's quite a difference between looking at a tank on video and actually being in person and seeing things that, you know, need attention.
Right. Or sometimes it's good just even if the tank is already set up to have another set of eyes, an experienced set of eyes. Look at your setup, look at the tank, look at your livestock, look at your plumbing, look at how you're doing everything, and give you a you know, a second opinion about, you know, maybe things that you can improve upon and whatnot. So that's something actually used to be really common in the hobby. I don't know how much it is anymore, but that to me is, if you can find a mentor, latch on to that person. So, okay, we have so far just one question, and if there's any other questions, try to get them in. It's 8:57. We got a few more minutes, so we can answer some questions. Well, first, let me just say we'll kind of go through the chat here a little bit. Um, let's see. Anthony Thompson says hello from Sustainable Marine. Best wishes. Watching your show while I'm in France. Cool. Want to thank
Oh, wow.
yeah, so yeah, that's Tony from the forum. He has the local fish store in England, but I guess he's in France right now. Some other people I see here, I see Philip is on the live chat. Philip does all of our picture and tank of the month. He handles that on the forum. Rogue Aquariums, I know him. There's SAF1, that's Scott from the forum. So we got, you know, a number of people from the forum in the live chat. So the question is with from Dances with Fishes says, what about meds that may expire for the kit? Shelf life of Rally. I have a bottle. Need to look for expiration. So the short answer on that is all medications obviously have an expiration date to them. That does not necessarily mean that they're bad. It means that they're going to be less effective. Their potency is going to be reduced once they're past whatever the expiration date is on the bottle. There are some exceptions to that. Copper does not really expire. Formalin does expire, and I would not use it past the expiration date because once formalin expires, it actually turns into paraformaldehyde, which is a more toxic form of formalin. I'm trying to think if there's any other exceptions to that. I think that's about it. Most medications, though, just are not going to be as potent or as effective once they pass that expiration date. So you definitely don't want to. You want to have them on hand. You don't want to stock up necessarily because if they expire, they're not going to be as effective if you try to use. Especially like antibiotics are a good example. They're just not going to be as effective once they're past that expiration date. So hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I don't see any other
An organizational tip that,
Mhm.
yeah,
Go ahead.
I was gonna say an organizational tip when mentioning expiration, because I do this like in my pantry, is like when you set up your little kit with your medications, have like a spreadsheet, or you could have it on a clipboard, whatever you use, and have like the medication and have the expiration, have all the meds listed and their expiration date. So that way, and if it starts getting close, you can maybe highlight it, on the spreadsheet or whatever. That way you can kind of order and prepare for the ones that you mentioned that it's important to keep them up to date. And the other thing I thought I'd mention is, like, since Philip's on the chat, Philip, like Bobby said, does our tank of the month and photo of the month. It, like I had mentioned earlier, have fun and enjoy and be confident. So our forum's really laid back and it's very diverse. There's all kind of tank styles, and one thing is participate in those contests because there's some really amazing products you can win, like Smarter Reefs, who you had on.
Yep.
But participate because you don't have to be a professional photographer. It doesn't have to be off a camera. It can be off your cell phone, but participate and have fun, and who knows, you might win.
Right. And like this month's is Smarter Reefs. It's a $50 or $100 gift card, depending on what you want to buy from him. So, I mean, you can just win that just from entering the photo contest. And we had him on 2 weeks ago. Amazing products. I mean, I don't even have a tank right now, and I was wanting to buy some of that stuff.
Oh, I was drooling. It was like, he would, and then he'd bring out another product, and I think, oh, I want that too.
Yeah.
So it was exciting.
Yep. Okay. Well, it is now 9 o'clock. Any final thoughts before we wrap it up?
No, it's just, come on the forum. There's such diversity there. I enjoy it, and our forum's very educational based. It's transparent. People share opinions and can feel free to share differences in opinions. There's lots of different styles. There's not just one style, and you can have chats on anything, and there's a lot of knowledgeable people that can guide you on coral care or fish stocking, and it's a huge wealth of resource. And really check it out, but engage. It's a community. The main thing is you can engage with one another and have fun, and I've made lots of new friends just by being part of it.
Yes. Yeah. It's so, I mean, to access the forum, it's real easy. Humble.fish. All you have to do, into a web browser, type Humble.fish, takes you right to the forum. If you just want to browse through it and just kind of look through some of the threads and information, you can do that. You don't have to be a member to do that. If you want to post and interact, just create an account. It's really easy, and then you can start posting and interact with the community. We have all kind of different people there. We have experts. We have people that are intermediate, people that are beginners. If you need obviously you have a fish disease problem, that's myself, and we also have some other fish disease experts and medics. There's people that are very good about diagnosing nuisance algae and pests. And if you have lighting questions or whatever your questions are, we'll figure it out together. So I'd welcome anyone watching this to join and visit the forum. So, okay, well, Linda, Dexter, I want to thank you for being on the show. I think it was very educational. Hopefully, I learned a lot, and hopefully, people watching did as well. Our next live stream is going to be in 3 weeks. We're going to take 3 weeks to the next one. July 11th at 8 p.m. Eastern time. I'll be interviewing Mr. Reef Safe. So that is the next live stream, and we will see you there.